There are two major stories exercising our audience tonight. The impossible, harrowing conflict in the Middle East and the near two-year-long stalemate just down the road at Stormont, meaning there is no devolved government here. Because tonight, Question Time is in Lisburn, near Belfast, a place that knows all about conflict and the painful path to peace. The wider Lagan Valley area here has both strong Unionist and Alliance Party support, but our audience here reflects the broad electoral picture across Northern Ireland. Welcome to Question Time. Good evening. On our panel this evening, we have from the UK Government, Chris Heaton-Harris, Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. He was previously a member of the European Parliament before being elected to the Commons in 2010. After working in Boris Johnson's government, he was appointed to his current role a year ago. Hilary Benn is Labour's Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. In a long Westminster career, which began last century just, he served in the governments of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. John Finucane is from Sinn Fein, and his party's core objective is a united Ireland. He's one of 7 Sinn Fein MPs, although none takes their seat at Westminster. Last year, and for the first time, they became the largest single party in the Northern Ireland Stormont Assembly elections. Sorcha Eastwood is a member of the Centrist Alliance Party, the 3rd largest party here. Last year, she was elected to Stormont as a member for Lagan Valley. Her commitment to politics was there for all to see in 2017, when her wedding day coincided with the general election, and she voted in her wedding dress. And Sir Jeffrey Donaldson leads the Democrat Unionist Party, the dominant unionist and conservative force here for the last 20 years, and now 2nd largest party at Stormont. The DUP walked out of Northern Ireland's power-sharing agreement 20 months ago in opposition to how Brexit trade arrangements affect Northern Ireland. Talks continue, but devolution here remains suspended. Good evening. It's great to be back in Northern Ireland. Welcome to our panellists, to our audience, and of course, welcome to you at home. We're available as a podcast straight after the show. If you would like to listen to the programme, just go to BBC Sounds. And of course, there's always a debate, a lively debate on social media as well. Let's take our first question from Michael O'Gallagher.
In Northern Ireland, we've learnt that talking is the key to conflict resolution. How do we encourage talks in the Middle East?
Chris, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, we've got to do everything we can to encourage talks in the Middle East. And actually, the Prime Minister has gone out there, the President of the United States has gone out there, our Foreign Secretary has gone out there to do exactly that and spoken to, the Prime Minister has spoken to the PM and the President of Israel. But these are really troubled times. Israel was attacked by a terrorist organisation. And Hamas is a terrorist organisation. We should all be able to say that. Israel has the right to defend itself. And everything has to be done properly, you know, in a humanitarian way as possible. But
can you see any serious chance of talks? And if so, talks with whom?
Eventually, yes. Northern Ireland's history demonstrates that eventually you can have talks and you can bring people together, but it takes an awful long time. George Mitchell was here, the senator who brought together the talks for the Belfast Good Friday Agreement back in April, and it took him 2 years in a very different context to do that.
And how far off do you think we would be?
I've honestly got no idea. I'm not an expert in the Middle East, and I just look in horror at what started to happen on October the 7th. But I can't imagine what it's like.
Hilary?
I mean, watching the scenes we've seen, the slaughter of the Israelis on the 7th of October and the deaths in Gaza it is so shocking. And we feel desperate, we feel despair, because what can we do? But I think that the experience here in Northern Ireland at a very dark time should give us some encouragement. Because, you know, when I was growing up and watching the news, reading the newspapers about what was happening here, and if you'd said to me at that time, do you think it will ever end? I might have said, well, I sincerely hope so, but I'm not sure I will live to see it. But we did. And how did it happen? How does conflict come to an end in all cases? It's through political leadership. And what has been absent in Israel and on the part of the Palestinians has been that political leadership. Because in the end, the people who are experiencing the conflict, they're in the same boat. The first time I went to Gaza, I met people in Sderot, an Israeli town which was being shelled from over in Gaza. Then I went to Beit Hanun, the other side of the fence, and a woman showed me where a shell came through the roof and killed her 12-year-old son when he was sleeping. And both these mothers said to me, our children are so terrified, they wet the bed at night. They lived 4 miles apart. They absolutely have a common interest. And you need political leaders to take the difficult step, which is not to say, I am the victim, you are oppressing me. You can carry on doing that forever, but to say, we need to put our weapons aside, sit down together and find a way of living alongside each other, as happened here in that extraordinary moment 25 years ago.
So are you saying, Hilary, then, that the current Israeli government is not the government to do that?
Well, the current Israeli government says, with absolute justice, there is no partner for peace on the part of Hamas, because Hamas is dedicated to the destruction of Israel. Yeah. And they are. And I agree with Chris when he says it was a terrorist attack that we saw. I mean, they claim we are protecting the Al-Aqsa Mosque. How does murdering babies in their beds advance the cause of the Palestinians?
But you're talking about political...
It is not.
Just briefly, because I need to get around the rest of the
Yeah.
panel, but you're talking about political leadership and a lack of political leadership. I assume you're including the Israeli government in that, from what you're saying.
In the end, on the part of Israel and the Palestinians, but the first step has to be, as you know from the experience in Northern Ireland, those who are seeking to change things and destroy one state by violence, namely Hamas, have to put their weapons down, abandon their wish to destroy the state of Israel, and say, we need to talk. And until that happens, who can the Israelis talk to?
Yeah. Woman here in the blue.
I just wanted to pick up, and it might be a small point relative to the discussion, but it's just something Chris said, that we should be free to say that Hamas is a terrorist organisation. I think within conflict resolution, we have to be brave, and we have to not be worried about the consequences of standing up and saying something that we believe in, without fear of retribution or retaliation from other people.
OK, thank you for your point. Yes, the woman there with the plait.
First of all, the ANC was a terrorist organisation and Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. And then you can say Yasser Arafat and the PLO, they were terrorists. And Mr Heaton-Harris, this didn't start on the 7th of October. Do the Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? Because the speak is, Israel has a right to defend itself. Did Palestine have a right to defend itself when land was taken from it, when people were dispossessed, when houses were levelled, when UN resolutions on torture, on ethnic cleansing, on apartheid? Did the Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? Did they have a right to defend themselves when Israel turn on and turn off the electricity and stop food and stop medical aid long, long before this attack?
Well,
because,
let's let him answer, shall we?
Just one more thing, right? There are 600 Palestinian children buried under the rubble at this moment in time. There are over 500 Palestinian children dead, and there are 500 Palestinian children in jail, 150 of them minors. Hostages, hostages. The children under the rubble are hostages. The children in the jails are hostages. There are hostages on both sides here.
What we can't be sure about, sadly, is exactly how many people have been killed, actually, because we know it's a lot, but we just can't know how many. Do you want to just quickly answer that?
Yeah, and I understand the passion with that the lady has talked. But on October the 7th, a terrorist attack of a music festival for a kibbutz changed the nature of the relationship between Israel and the Palestinian, Hamas, most certainly, and Palestinian.
Let him answer. Give him a chance to answer.
And Israel has absolutely got the right to look after itself. Yesterday I spoke to, there's a very small Jewish community here in Northern Ireland and a slightly larger Muslim community. I spoke to the leaders of both communities. And what they both wanted is what I believe everybody will want in this audience, is peace. But it's a long road to peace, and you don't get anywhere along that road when you're attacking and killing people at music festivals and flying in and kidnapping people. It's just not right.
John, so Michael's question is, in Northern Ireland, we've learned that talking is key to conflict resolution. How do we encourage talks in the Middle East?
Yeah, and I think it's a very good way to frame the question, because talking is key, and it's not, in this case, as simple as just going straight to talking. We need to create the circumstances where dialogue is possible. And if we take the 7th of October, every person that I've heard right across the world has rightfully condemned what was a deliberate targeting and killing and hostage taking on of civilians within Israel. What we have seen in response since October 7th, and sorry, I must say that's also a breach of international law, what happened on October the 7th. What we have seen every single day since October 7th is a breach of international law by the Israelis. And of course, virtually every single day prior to October 7th, the Israeli government have breached international law. They have occupied Palestinian land in contravention of international law. They have blockaded Palestinian territory in contravention of international law. They have built and enlarged settlements in contravention of international law, enforced an apartheid system that strips Palestinians of the most basic civic and human rights, not to mention natural dignity. And they have also targeted and killed and injured civilians on a mass scale for decades. And the response of the Western world at this time is what? Israel has a right to defend itself. Well, what exactly does that mean? Because the way that that's been interpreted, the way Israel takes that to mean, is that they can cut off food, that they can cut off the power, that they can cut off water, that they can enforce the displacement of over 1 million citizens in what has been described by NGOs and United Nations reps on the ground as an open-air prison.
So what do you think it should mean?
Well, what I think
and when Israel talks about wanting to destroy Hamas, do you agree with that?
What I think, to answer the question, I was struck yesterday by an open letter that was signed, amongst others, by the former President of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, Lord Neuberger. The letter was signed off by those who identified themselves as Jewish and as lawyers. And what they cautioned against was international law being flouted once again. What they said was that the right to defend yourself is defined within the confines of international law. And where Israel is grieving, where Israel is hurt, there is an even bigger onus on self-identifying friends of Israel, like the British government, like the American government and other Western governments, to be critical friends and to say that there comes a time when cutting off power, cutting off food, cutting off all of the basics that people need.
OK, but let me just ask you again, because one of Israel's stated...
hang on, one of Israel's stated...
It is, but let me just ask you, you didn't answer my question. No, John, you didn't answer my question.
Let me finish and I will come back.
No, I want you to answer this question. No, John, I want you to answer this question. One of Israel's stated aims is to destroy Hamas. Do you agree with that?
The stated aim of Israel may well be that they say to destroy Hamas.
Yeah, I'm asking if you agree with that.
I will answer the question. What I have witnessed, not to mention over the past decades, but let's take the last 10 days, what I have witnessed is a defenceless people getting pummeled from the air by one of the most sophisticated and powerful militaries on this planet.
And you've made that point very powerfully.
By also one of the most powerful militaries in this world. And what we need is the introduction of language that there needs to be dialogue, because none of this that is happening...
So do you agree with that aim or not? Do you agree with the Israeli... I mean, I'll give up in a minute because you're not answering the question.
No,
but do you agree with the Israel's aim to destroy Hamas?
I don't think anybody believes that what Israel is doing is going to destroy Hamas, let alone embed the safety within that region.
But do you think they're right to try or not?
The wider world. Well, you can say that. I mean, how many civilians are we allowed to watch die?
Listen, I'm not saying whether it's right or I'm just asking whether you agree with their aim.
Israel will have an aim and an objective that it is defined by their own,
am I getting an answer?
Terms.
No, John, I don't think I'm getting it. Okay.
The point is that international law and human rights standards cannot be thrown out the window.
Okay, and you've made that point very strongly and very eloquently. I hear you. Jeffrey.
Well, look, we've all witnessed the horrific scenes that have been played out. Let me be absolutely clear. The unprovoked terrorist attack on Israel was wrong. Like Hilary, I've stood in the town of Sderot. I've visited the homes of ordinary Israelis. I've met people in the West Bank. I've met Palestinians. I've been out there a number of times and talked to people, and I agree that the ordinary people want peace. But can I just say, this notion, you know, that Israel is an apartheid state, that it doesn't work, and that we hold Israel up on the one hand, and then we talk about the Palestinian side. Let's get a sense of perspective. Israel is a democracy. The people who live in Israel can vote, including the Israeli Arabs. In Gaza, it is entirely different. Hamas rules Gaza with an iron fist. They eradicated Fatah, took them out in Gaza. And as for their human rights record, it is absolutely appalling. And so to attack Israel in the way that John has with respect, I think is wrong. There is no defence, none whatsoever, for that attack that occurred on the 7th of October, the murder of innocent people. Now, and as the Secretary of State has said, it is terrorism through and through. Now, what do we do? The question is a good question. And Northern Ireland was seen for many years as a seemingly intractable conflict, that there was no way to resolve our conflict, that we were just going to be locked in forever into division and the violence that flowed from that division. And I think there has been a failing, not just on the part of, and Hilary is right to call out leadership, but a failing too on the part of the international community. We benefited in Northern Ireland from the support of the international community in bringing people together, facilitating dialogue. And I've seen an absence of that in recent years. The situation has been allowed to drift. And the result and the consequences of no dialogue is that other people step in. And they step in and take it into their own hands. And they are wrong. The idea that Hamas murdering innocent Israelis is in any way or shape in the interests of the Palestinian people. Thousands of Palestinians may well die in this war. And they will die because they've been put in harm's way by their so-called overlord Hamas.
And Jeffrey, to John's point about the siege of Gaza, about the cutting off of water, of electricity, of not allowing food in.
Well, I would prefer, on a humanitarian basis, that people in Gaza have access to food, have access to water, have access to the basic amenities that they need. But the difficulty is when Hamas use people as human shields, when they fire their rockets from the schoolyards, from the car parks of hospitals, when they engage in that kind of activity, it is very, very difficult. It makes for a very messy war situation in which lots of innocent people, sadly, on both sides lose their lives. And that is unacceptable. But if we're going to make a change here, because every war and conflict has a beginning and an end, and then the question is, what then? What comes after that? And I think the international community has got to step in here. The instability in the Middle East has consequences for all of us. And therefore, it is vital that a process of dialogue is found. The first point that must be taken is the same as in Northern Ireland. Those who see violence as a way to resolve division are wrong. They must lay down their arms, call a ceasefire, come to the table and start talking and sort it out.
Sorcha.
What I don't want to do tonight is have a situation where we make this about ourselves in Northern Ireland, and I think it's really important to say that. I also think it's really important that we talk about the people and the families in the Middle East, in Israel, in Palestine. And I watched babies being put into incubators in a hospital because they were premature and told where to go. There's nowhere for them to go. We watched young people at a music festival being mown down in the most barbaric way. And I think people have discussed this well enough. The only thing I would like to add is that, and Jeffrey mentioned this to be fair, there is an early day motion in the House at the minute. We have put our name to that motion, and that sets out that we must have a ceasefire. It is a decision to carry on with attrition, and that's what people have set out tonight, becomes a war of attrition. Not one life is worth violence, and we need to prioritise the humanitarian needs. We need to have a humanitarian corridor opened up. We need to have that ceasefire. And yes, we do, as everyone has said, need to have the international community come and put their arm round. But what I think is also important to say is that it isn't mutually exclusive, as somebody else had said earlier. It isn't mutually exclusive to call out the absolutely horrific actions of Hamas, but at the same time, challenge Israel where they have acted wrong, and certainly condemn where we feel that they have breached international humanitarian law, as set out clearly in statute and legislation through the Geneva Convention and other things. And you can see already tonight in the room, it's ratcheted up a little, the tempo has increased, and we don't want that.
Can I ask you about the ceasefire, because a number of Labour MPs have put their name to that as well. How are you envisaging that working? Are you talking about a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas? Can you see Hamas taking part in that?
Well,
how do you see it working?
As others have set out, this is very unclear in terms of even real-time information coming out.
But when the fact you put your name, here representing the Alliance Party, of course, to a motion calling for a ceasefire between who?
So we would see that being facilitated by the UN. We think they're the only people at this stage in the game that can actually step in and facilitate a dialogue. Everyone has agreed that there should be no more killing. Everyone has agreed that there should be a dialogue. And with respect, that is a choice for people to carry on without having that international community coming round. Everyone has said they want the bloodshed to end. That can only end when people set down weapons. That can only end whenever people step in from the international community.
But Hamas haven't said that. Hamas want to eradicate Israel from the map.
Hamas are a terrorist organisation. Yeah. We've all agreed on that.
How can Israel talk to Hamas in this?
And it's not a matter of making this about things that people may or may not agree and disagree on. It's about people are dying. People are dying. Hospitals are being bombed. Young people were mown down in their prime by terrorists at a music festival. None of this conversation is bringing peace, and that's so desperately what's needed in the Middle East.
You want to jump in quickly, and I want to come to you.
Everybody wants the killing to end, but we have to put our effort where it's going to make a difference. And Hamas is continuing to attack Israel. And is Israel meant to sit there while the rockets continue to come over? Is Israel meant to sit there and not try and rescue their hostages? And I don't think it would make a difference at the moment. There will eventually be a ceasefire, because that's how all the conflicts in Gaza have eventually ended, when the fighting is finished and people are exhausted. The place to put our effort is to get the humanitarian aid in. Now, President Biden went yesterday and persuaded Israel to open the Rafah crossing, although when I checked earlier,
no lorries have yet gone in.
And 20 lorries is nothing. We need a much bigger pipeline of humanitarian aid, food, fuel. Fuel's important because the generators in the hospitals in Gaza need fuel to run the electricity, to do the operations, to keep the babies alive in the incubators. And that is where we should focus our effort.
I think we're proud that we have signed that, because it shows people in our community who are hurting, who genuinely care. And Chris mentioned the Jewish community in Northern Ireland, people who are from Palestine living in Northern Ireland, and they need to feel safe here. And that's really important, not just in Northern Ireland, right across the UK. And we're proud that we have put our name to calling for peace and humanitarian support.
Well, let's hear from some of the people in our audience, shall we? Yes, the man there, a bit further over in the blue top with the white stripes on your collar. Yes.
Fiona, it came as no surprise to me whatsoever there that John Finucane deliberately dodged your question. He clearly supports a terrorist organisation in Hamas. Him and the rest of his cronies in the Sinn Fein are in bed with another terrorist organisation, be it the IRA. The two similarities...
Well, listen, I must let... That's a very serious allegation, and I must let John
everybody over
that.
Here knows it. Sadly, through the week, Hamas bombed a hospital. Another similarity, that the IRA did exactly the same thing.
Hang on, are you talking about the Al-Akhli hospital? Mm-hmm. It is not clear who targeted
there's a high
that
possibility that is true. The same things that IRA did here a number of years ago, bombed the Mater Hospital, the military wing, and killed 2 people. A disgrace. And that's the type of terrorist organisation him and his party are supporting.
John, of course, I must let you answer that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's completely untrue, and I think it's what we're seeing is an opportunity to take the suffering of thousands and thousands of people in the Middle East to make what I would describe as a fairly cheap political point in what is a very serious conversation. You've made an accusation against me, and that's fine. You have your own view, and I'm not going to patronise you to change it. But I'm somebody who grew up during a conflict. I'm somebody who had the conflict visited upon me, very personally, as a result of the murder of my father. The very first time that I voted in my life, I've said this before, was for the Good Friday Agreement. And I'm very grateful that I was given that opportunity by people on all sides who recognised the potential of dialogue, who recognised and created the conditions for peace that ultimately led to the Good Friday Agreement that I was very proud to vote for the very first time that I voted. So I've benefited from peace. I've benefited from people who have not went out of their way to poke political opponents in their eye. And I'm reminded of the words of Martin McGuinness, who said that you don't make peace with your friends. And peace processes, by their very nature and definition, are difficult. They cause a lot of upset and difficult decisions to be made, but they are necessary for those who are serious about peace. So to clarify what I said in my earlier answer, is that there will be very difficult decisions that require to be taken by all sides in the Middle East at the minute, all sides who have both inflicted and suffered hurt. But it's not good enough, and I've sort of heard a little bit of mixed messaging from some of the answers so far tonight, that one, there's an absence of leadership in the Western world, but two, Israel has a right to defend itself. The way Israel is interpreting that, what is it? Because I think if we are to see leadership in the Western world, we are going to have to see the conditions for every armed group that is on the ground over there at the minute to be convinced and brought to the place where an immediate ceasefire is put in place, where all hostages are given back without a single second of delay, and the conditions are created where they can possibly aspire to what we have benefited from here.
Okay. I am going to move on, if you'll forgive me, those who've got your hands up, because as many of you asked about the Middle East, also asked about this next question, so I want to give it time to do it justice. Before I do, I'll just say next week we are in Bradford in West Yorkshire, and after that we're in Chipping Campden in Gloucestershire. If you'd like to come to either of those programmes, Bradford or Chipping Campden, go to the address on the screen, the Question Time website, follow the instructions and come and be part of our audience. We would love to see you. And also, if you'd like a picture of your town to feature here, I can't quite say, oh yes, there they are. We'd like to see it. We'd like to show where we're going around the country. So if you would like to put your own pictures up here, email us with your best efforts and we will put them on the screen. And the address is qtpictures@bbc.co.uk. Right. Let's get our next question now, which is from, where's my list? Here it is. Gary Clark, where are you? There you are.
How much longer should the people of Northern Ireland have to tolerate a lack of devolved government and crumbling public services?
A lot of questions about this. So I think the size of that round of applause would indicate quite how much interest is in this subject. For those who are not perhaps quite so familiar with it, as I know every single one of you is, Stormont has not sat since February last year. Jeffrey.
Well, first of all, Fiona, Stormont has sat since February last year. Let's get our facts right.
Well, there's no functionally devolved government. What happened last
February was that the First Minister was withdrawn in the first step of a process that was designed to bring the EU and the UK government back to the table to address the very real problems created for us in Northern Ireland by a protocol that had been imposed without our consent.
But also, in terms of getting our facts right, the Stormont Assembly is not sitting.
It's not sitting at the moment.
Exactly.
That is correct. And, it did sit after February. The First Minister withdrew in February. Ministers remained in place for several months after that and continued to run their departments. It was, we took a phased approach, a proportionate approach. We had sat in government in Stormont from the restoration of devolution after a 3-year absence. And we had made clear to the government at the time that something would have to be done about the protocol because it didn't have the support of unionists. Not a single unionist elected to the Assembly supported the protocol. And therefore, the cross-community consensus that is essential in Northern Ireland to make power sharing work was not there. Furthermore, unionist ministers were being required to implement measures that created a border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. And that is not something that we can accept.
But you've now got a different situation now, haven't you? So you've got the Windsor framework, which is another iteration brokered by Rishi Sunak. And just listening to you, Jeffrey, at the DUP conference, the kind of mood music coming from you, correct me if I'm wrong, sounded like you were getting closer to being able to accept the Windsor framework. Am I right? And I'm just wondering if the problem is you can't bring the rest of your party with you.
No, that's not the case at all, Fiona. My party is very clear in what is needed here. And in fact, we put proposals to the government following the publication of the Windsor framework. There are elements of the framework that do represent progress, and we welcome that, and we've said that. And I think we are closer now to finding a resolution than we were at the beginning of this process when no one was listening, when the EU said there will be no renegotiation. We got them back to the table. We've made progress. There remain some areas that still have to be resolved, but we're working every week in those discussions with the government to close the gap and resolve the issues. Look, I want to see, as I made clear at my conference at the weekend, I'm a devolutionist. I want to see Stormont back up and running, but I want it to be there on a sustainable basis. Our public finances are not adequate to deliver effective public services in Northern Ireland. So we need to sort that out. The formula that delivers funding for those public services falls short of the needs of the people of Northern Ireland. That needs to be resolved. So if Stormont is to be restored, and I want it to be restored, it has to be on a basis that it can deliver those public services. But fundamentally, Fiona, and this is crucial to how Northern Ireland functions, we've got to restore that cross-community consensus. The one thing I've learned in Northern Ireland in all my time in politics is that the politics of exclusion does not work. Our approach has got to be inclusive. That means that all parties in the coalition that form the executive have got to feel that their concerns are being taken on board and addressed. That is why the DUP at the outset recognised that the solution for Northern Ireland was not to put a hard border on the island, but equally the solution is not to put a border in the Irish Sea. There are ways we can resolve this. Let me bring in the rest of the panel. There are ways we can resolve this, Fiona. We are working on them. We've moved closer to agreement. I am determined to finish this, get it done, and to see Stormont restored on a basis that unionists as well as nationalists can support.
In response to your question, how much longer should Northern Ireland be without a government? Not a second longer. Not a second longer. Jeffrey, you talk about devolution and you say the DUP are a party of devolution, right? And you're saying that you want to make this work. So on this show, around this desk, a number of years ago, you said there is only one of the 5 parties who are refusing to go into government, and it is wrong, in my opinion, in a democracy that one party representing maybe 25% of the people is able to veto the establishment of a government. That is not democracy, and it has to change. Let me explain why I agree. It's not just a cheap soundbite. This is about people. And this is our constituency of Lagan Valley. And I can see people here in the audience tonight who I don't know. And I can see maybe a few who I do know. And do you know what I do know? Every single one of those people is hurting. Every single one of those families is hurting. People getting sicker on waiting lists, schools having to collect money for books, toilet roll, everything else. This is not our first rodeo. It wasn't right whenever Sinn Fein did it. It certainly isn't right whenever you're doing it. And do you know what we're saying? Not a minute longer. Not a single minute longer. You have made a decision to do this. And it's the wrong decision. And you know what? I hope the people here tonight get the chance for their voice to be heard. We understand that you have a problem. But here's where it becomes everyone else's problem. You don't get to take your ball and go off the pitch just because it's something you don't like. Well, we didn't like Brexit. We worked it and we made it happen. And do you know what? Our job is to govern. Our job is to stand for election and do a job. So do you know what? If you don't want to do the job, get out of the way and let those of us who want to govern...
Jeffrey, I'll come back to you. I promise I'll come back to you. Jeffrey, I will, of course, give you a chance as well. I'm going to hear a little bit from the audience first. Yes, the woman there in the black and white striped shirt.
Northern Ireland has the lowest standard of living across the UK. People are living in poverty. They can't afford their energy bills. They can't afford food. Our government need to stop and get back into power and forget about what's in the past and move forward and stop giving this same rhetoric all the time.
Absolutely. Okay.
You need to get in there and do the job that you were elected to do with every other party.
Okay. Man there in the glasses, yeah. Yeah.
I am sick, sore and tired of hearing the DUP's pathetic excuses. They've been out of government now for 20 months. Public services are crumbling. The DUP need to get back to work, and if they don't want to, then step aside and let those who actually want to do the job get on with it. I'd also say as well tonight, one brief point to Mr Heaton-Harris and to Mr Benn. Whoever is the Secretary of State after the next general election, you need to get on with reforming the Stormont institutions to prevent any one party from holding Northern Ireland to ransom ever again. Because the merry-go-round of stop and start politics is what has held Northern Ireland back so much for the past 25 years.
Yeah. Now, I noticed that when Jeffrey was speaking, some of you applauded what Jeffrey had to say. So just to make sure I get a cross-section of views, let's hear from one. So, yes, the man there in the red. You were one of those supporting Jeffrey's view. Let's hear it.
No, I appreciate what Jeffrey is saying, but I'm a further education lecturer here in Lisburn, and I'm currently on a strike at the moment, and I'm losing money striking. Jeffrey's colleagues aren't sitting in Stormont. They're still getting paid. The cost of living is hitting people here. You have to realise, you have to take it on board, Jeffrey. We need the House on the Hill working. Also, to Mr Chris Heaton-Harris, I noticed recently you pumped £500 million into further education in England, but we're getting cut the further education budget here in Northern Ireland, and that's a total disgrace.
John.
Yeah, well, the context that's already been teased out is that this is in protest at Brexit, a Brexit that the DUP championed and campaigned for, and well, it is. It's the outworkings of the protocol and the outworkings of the Windsor framework, which is the outworkings of Brexit.
It certainly is Brexit.
And it's the people here who have not a single say in the conversations between the British government and the European Commission that are being punished for all the reasons that we've heard. We have a health service in crisis. We've the worst waiting lists on these islands. We have more and more people in our public services that are having to go on strike. And we have a cost of living that is impacting more than just the traditionally vulnerable. It's hitting working families and it's hitting businesses on a daily basis. And those are the people that are having to suck it up and face that punishment because of the outworking of a Brexit project that the DUP championed and welcomed with open arms. And not only do we need to have the result of last year's election respected, because it is anti-democratic. The people spoke last year and they cast their votes overwhelmingly for parties who want to get round the table and work with each other. Michelle O'Neill, who should be in the position as First Minister, has said from day one that she wants to take her place at that executive table with you and your party, along with the other parties, to begin to tackle the problems that were there in May last year and which are much, much worse now at this stage. But there's also huge opportunities. The Windsor framework provides dual market access that is the envy of so many of colleagues that I see in Westminster from Scotland and England and Wales who would give their right arm for the economic potential that we have here. Within a matter of days, we have 40 major companies, as you know, coming to these shores from America with a keen interest to invest, to build roots in this jurisdiction, to increase their investment for those companies who have already laid down roots here, to create well-paid jobs and boost our economy. But one thing that they want is political stability. So not a single day longer should we have to wait for the absence, in the absence of an assembly. We need an assembly, we need an executive. Where I will agree with Jeffrey is that we need an executive with a single voice demanding the resources to begin to tackle the problems that this room know that we have. But the way to do that is not outside, it's inside, taking your place along with everybody else.
And John, what about Sorcha's point? That, I mean, you mentioned that you think the DUP is behaving anti-democratically. What about when Sinn Fein pulled out of Stormont back in 2017? Well, the context,
I mean, I'm glad you brought it up.
Was that not similarly anti-democratic?
This came up the last time, and the context of that was Martin McGuinness asking Arlene Foster to step aside in the midst of what was an unprecedented financial scandal here. And there was a deal to be done to have us back in the executive within 12 months. And it was the DUP who, at that time, were in a very strong position of power at Westminster, who turned their nose up at it, and they are firmly to blame for the reason why that 1 year turned into 3 years. And it took a new decade, new approach, series of political talks before we got an Assembly and Stormont up and running. And what did we see even a couple of months after that? We saw a pandemic the likes of which the world had never seen. The public actually got a glimpse at times as to what an executive that works together in everybody's interest can actually deliver. And that's what people who I talk to say to me on a daily basis that they want back.
OK, so I'll come to you too, of course, and back to you, Jeffrey. Yes, the man there in the T-shirt, yeah.
Yeah, I'd just like to say to Jeffrey, we hear quite a lot about what you don't like. You don't like this, you don't like that, but I'd actually like to know, what are you proposing? What are you putting on the table to solve the protocol? Because to me, the alternative is either a hard border on the island of Ireland, which would be unacceptable to my community, and I'm from Derry. A hard border on the island of Ireland wouldn't work. So, like, what actually are you proposing?
Jeffrey, do you want to take these questions before I come to Chris and Hilary?
Yeah, well, thank you. Look, first of all, in response to what Sorcha said about the DUP, Sorcha, you and I fought an Assembly election in this constituency.
And you didn't take your seat off the back of it.
I didn't interrupt you.
And you didn't take your seat off the back of it. I'm glad to remind everyone.
I didn't interrupt you. You got your say, and now I will have my say. I took my case to the people in this constituency, as did Sorcha. And Sorcha can look down her nose at unionists all she wants, but I got a mandate from the people of this constituency to take the actions that I have taken.
Jeffrey,
and as for Sorcha saying unionists should get out of the way, the politics of exclusion in Northern Ireland doesn't work, and it saddens me that the Alliance Party, of all parties, are the party who are now talking about exclusion, excluding people. Unionists should get out of the way. That is not the way to build
Jeffrey,
a shared future
the DUP should stop holding Northern Ireland to ransom.
We need to work together, and we need to resolve these issues together. I welcome John's conversion to participatory politics. John, you might take your seat at Westminster, where we can actually argue the case for the money that Northern Ireland needs. Instead, you sit outside Westminster with your 6 colleagues and you have no influence. And where we need that influence, the only way we're going to settle pay parity for our teachers, our nurses, our doctors, is to get the money that we need. We need to change the funding formula for Northern Ireland, which needs to be based on the funding our public services on a needs-based approach. That will come at Westminster, and that's why we're arguing the case at Westminster for funding, and the DUP has taken the lead on that. As for the solution, it's a fair question. I accept that. And our solution is very clear. Where goods are leaving Great Britain and going via Northern Ireland into the EU, the Republic of Ireland, they should be subject to the normal customs arrangements. Where goods are coming from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, staying within the United Kingdom, because after all, we're still part of the United Kingdom, they do not need to be checked on a customs arrangement. Why should we pay customs duty on goods moving from Birmingham to Belfast? It's wrong, and a border in the Irish Sea that prevents us trading with our biggest market is wrong. We are part of the United Kingdom. We are entitled to equal citizenship within the United Kingdom, and we shouldn't be treated as second-class citizens, and that has to end, and that's why I'm speaking up for unionism.
Okay. Right, Chris, you are Northern Ireland Secretary. Why haven't you sorted this out yet?
Yeah, good question. So I guess by spelling out the framework that I have to operate in, as Jeffrey has said, this place operates on consensus. One side of society here does not want to go into Stormont to govern, and I cannot intervene in that. That's set out in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. It actually has got, it's the piece that was hard won here 25 years ago that has set up the system that we have. So my job has been to try and sort out the just concerns, and some of them are very just, of the unionist community and their politicians. Because the Northern Ireland Protocol did lead to companies from Great Britain not placing goods for sale in Northern Ireland. And so unionists, probably in this audience, could see goods disappearing from the United Kingdom, from Great Britain, that were coming here and being replaced by goods from the European Union, and felt, and I feel justly, they felt they were being pulled out of the orbit of the United Kingdom's internal market and into the European single market. That's not what the UK government wanted. That's why a huge amount of effort went into negotiating the Windsor Framework.
And Jeffrey says, as far as he's concerned, there have been improvements that you are happy to see in the Windsor Framework. So is a deal imminent? Because there's kind of mood music that I'm picking up from the Conservative conference, the DUP conference, is that it feels like it could be. Is it?
I would love it to be. I mean, I think we are. I think we are in the final phases of a wonderful group of talks. I've enjoyed Jeffrey's company and the company of his colleagues.
Do you think you're in the final phases as well?
Deal.
I think we've made progress. I think we are moving closer to finding and getting
final phases. Would you use that phrase?
And look, I will work day and night to get that solution. I recognise the frustration that people have. I want to see Stormont back up and running. I'm a Democrat. I want that to work. But we've got to get this right, and I will work till we get it.
Yeah, can I say, so the Windsor Framework, which...
Can I just tell people what it is? I know you're all fantastically familiar with it. Not everyone around the UK is. So the Windsor Framework was negotiated in February this year. This is something that Rishi Sunak announced. And it's to reduce the number of checks, goods coming from Great Britain into Northern Ireland and then some of which go on to Ireland. So it creates a green lane for goods that are just going into Northern Ireland, so there are fewer checks there, and a red lane for goods that will go through Northern Ireland into Ireland, therefore into the EU. That's basically it in a nutshell.
It's part of it, but yes, that's a very good description. And what we have, and what's come from that is, and actually started operating on the 1st of October. So you can see for yourselves what the level of checks such as they are might be, and actually I think everybody would agree that it's gone remarkably smoothly for a new system. Thousands more companies have now registered for the UK internal market scheme who want to supply Northern Ireland from Great Britain. We want part of the papers that went with the Windsor Framework was to guarantee unfettered access for goods from Northern Ireland into Great Britain. But
what people are asking is not the fine detail of the Windsor Framework. How much longer should the people of Northern Ireland tolerate lack of government?
Not for a minute longer. I don't think they kind of made it any clearer. And can I just say, do you know what's in the final phases? The people of Northern Ireland, public services, public health, the education of our children, special education.
You've made, Sorcha, in fairness, you have made that point. You have made that point. Hilary, let me bring Hilary in.
Well, to come back to the question, I really hope not a minute longer. It is, however, for Jeffrey and his party to take their decision. But look, I was a passionate Remainer, and John is right. We are dealing with the consequences of that vote. And the EU says we must make sure that goods coming to the EU meet our standards, which is a perfectly reasonable position to take. But I regarded the Windsor Framework as a very significant step forward. I did. And I said that before I was appointed to this job. And I didn't understand at the time why the DUP didn't embrace it. The checks have got to be implemented sensibly, sensitively, and over time the EU, I think, will see there isn't really a problem. The question is that principle of how the checks operate on the Green Lane big enough to continue to mean that Northern Ireland has no government? And all I can tell you is, since I was appointed on the 4th of September, just about every conversation I've had with all the people I've been meeting has come back down to we haven't got a functioning government. And we need a functioning government. The people of Northern Ireland need it. And on the budget, the current budget is not sustainable for the reasons that have been set out so clearly. And that needs to change too.
Okay. Right. I've got about 10 minutes. I'm going to take one more question because there's a lot of interest in this as well. Now, this is, in one sense, very local, but actually is important to the whole of the UK. So, Emma, where are you? Emma Gordon. Oh, there you are.
What is the best way to help clean up Lough Neagh?
Right, so Lough Neagh is the largest freshwater lake in the UK. It's about the size of the Isle of Wight, and it supplies half of Belfast drinking water, 40% of Northern Ireland's overall. I just want to show everybody a picture. So let's have a look at Lough Neagh, what it used to look like, and let's show you what it looks like now. And actually, it looks, in many places, a lot worse than that. Because in many places, it's completely green all the way across. All sorts of fertiliser, human excrement, all sorts of stuff's going in there. What is the best way to clean it up? John?
Well, it's another example of where we would benefit from a functioning executive and assembly, that we would have local ministers with local knowledge working with the communities that are impacted. And it's a tragedy when you look at the images, and I agree that the footage that your viewers are seeing tonight doesn't reflect the severity of the environmental problem that Lough Neagh is facing. It's devastating for those who live beside it, for those who swim in it and use it, who fish from it, who earn their living from it. It's also a piece of land here and water that is not in public ownership. It's owned by...
It's owned by the National Trust, a number of councils, different charities, the Department of Agriculture, Environment, Rural Affairs. I mean, is that part of the problem, that there are so many different hands involved in it?
That's not where ultimate ownership rests, but with regards, I think where people are saying that there is responsibility to maintain and look after, I think that is an issue as well. But it is something that needs to be addressed, and addressed quickly. The problem that I see in my constituency's North Belfast, it's not impacted by it as much as my colleagues or other people here on this island. But where the frustration comes from is that lack of anybody taking charge at the wheel to actually say this needs to be addressed.
And what do you think should happen?
Whether it's councils. Well, I'm not trying to pivot back into the previous conversation, but I would like to see a minister who's in charge of agricultural and rural affairs taking the lead on sorting this problem out and working with government.
How do you think it should be? I mean, what do you think is the answer to stop farmers putting allowing fertiliser going into the water? I mean, what is the answer?
I think that's certainly one of the problems, but it's not quite as simple as just
I know it's
one,
not as simple as
for
that.
example, one pipe putting stuff in that you can easily identify and fix. It's a problem that requires expertise that I don't have, but as a political representative and as a political leader, we must be working together to treat that as the emergency and the crisis that it is.
Jeffrey, what's the best way to help clean up Lough Neagh?
Well, I think, first of all, we've got to look at how Lough Neagh is, the governance arrangements. And I think we need a new approach to Lough Neagh. It's the largest inland waterway system in the whole of these islands. It should be on a statutory footing. I think that we need the Lough Neagh Partnership, whom I've met, are frustrated because they are very limited in what they can do. They've sought to coordinate the response alongside the Department of Agriculture and the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, and that is, to a degree, beginning to address this problem. Part of it is what goes into Lough Neagh, but look, there are also natural phenomena here at work, and you see it in waterways across the UK. It's not just Lough Neagh where you'll find blue-green algae. The weather conditions this year, the presence of certain species in the loch have all contributed to the higher level of that algae in the water this year. And yes, nitrates is a problem. I've met the Farmers Union, I've talked to them about it. They're willing to work with others to reduce the level of nitrates that leaches into the loch. There is sewage discharge into the loch. That needs to be tackled, Northern Ireland Water. A lot of that is going to require investment. It does come back to the budgetary issues partly. We need a proper budget for investing in our water and sewage system in Northern Ireland. It is creaking at the seams. So there's a need for a joined-up approach. It's an environmental disaster that has happened this summer, and it needs to be tackled.
Man there with the glasses.
Yeah, there's a common theme coming out of the questions tonight and the answers to the audience, or the questions from the audience and the answers from the panel. The one missing ingredient here is a sitting executive that's being held up by one party in Northern Ireland. However, the Secretary of State and the department, you're right in what you said, Jeffrey, in terms of the departments are crying out. Every single department now in Northern Ireland has said they don't have enough money to operate basic functions of their services. However, the Secretary of State, or our excuse of a Secretary of State, Mr. Harris, sitting there, is washing his hands off absolutely everything and saying it's not my responsibility, not my responsibility, I can't do that. However, he was able to implement a punishment budget on every single citizen in Northern Ireland when services are crumbling. He ought to be ashamed of himself.
You better answer that, Chris, go on.
Yeah,
I'll leave it to you.
Forgive me, but you couldn't be more wrong. And the budget was set in the spending review that before I even became Secretary of State. It's the sum of money that was always going to come to Northern Ireland.
Well, it's the government of which you are.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a very senior representative.
But it's also the money that's been put in the spending review. It's done through the Barnett consequentials, and how it's spent is determined by the executive. There was an executive sitting, and as someone did say, what all this needs is a joined-up approach, and that's exactly what you have ministers for.
Sorcha, it's actually quite
Secretary escaped and there's no minister sitting in Stormont. Yeah, so get your finger out and start doing it. Public services here are falling apart. Everything is falling apart in Northern Ireland, and it's on your watch. No, it's on your watch. But Mr. Benn, you can sit there early because you get the next
That's a misunderstanding of what is achievable here, because if I was to do that, there would be a group of people in Northern Ireland who'd say, oh, that looks like direct rule. That looks like Westminster imposing itself on Northern Ireland.
You imposed the budget.
No,
okay,
no.
You need to let him answer now.
So, no.
Hang on. If you're going to put questions, you need to let the person answer.
So, as I say, the money was set aside in the spending review. It's done properly and thoroughly. Happy to talk with a reformed executive about what makes a budget sustainable.
Of course you are. When everyone else lingers.
Hang on, because I've got to let the. We've heard you, and you've made your point very powerfully. I've got to let two more people on the panel answer this question. I've got about 2.5 minutes. So, Sorcha, reasonably briefly,
It is a punitive budget. Make no doubt about it.
But let's talk about Lough Neagh. Hang on, the question is, what is the best way to help clean up Lough Neagh?
That does feed into the situation with Lough Neagh. What I would say, to be brief, because everyone else has spoken on it quite well, we need an independent environmental protection agency. That has been Alliance policy for a long time. People care deeply about the Lough. It's become a totem almost of the issues that are engulfing Northern Ireland at the minute. It's part of the constituency here in Lagan Valley, communities like Derrymore, Bartons Bay, etc. But what I would say is that this government does actually have sewage on its hands. We know Fergal Sharkey, late of this parish in Northern Ireland, has been an excellent campaigner across the UK for water safety and water quality. We are living through a climate crisis, and we can't sustain this level of damage to our water, to our environment, to our animals and biodiversity much longer. And sadly, everything, as the audience have said, comes back to the fact that we desperately need an executive, or there will be nothing left.
Hilary, you are very new in the job, only a few weeks, but Lough Neagh, it's been covered on the news nationally, and it's a hugely important waterway.
The two dead swans. Now, for too long, human beings have treated the natural world as if it was inexhaustible and would always replenish itself. And we're coming to terms with the consequences of that mistake. Now, I am a practical person. There should be convened a task force of all of the people who have a responsibility, the owner, the Environment Agency, NI Water, everybody else, with the powers. You need buffer strips to stop farming nitrates running off, with a task to begin to change it. The other reason it's happening is climate change. The temperature's higher. It helps the algae to grow. And so we have to tackle that as well. And it's going to take a long time, because this was a long time coming, a long time to sort it. But you need to bring people together when you have a problem and say, you're responsible, and if you need powers, we'll give them to you. Go away and put together a plan to sort it out.
All right. On that note, I'm sorry, those of you who still got your hands up. Our hour is up. Forgive me. I'm afraid we have run out of time. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much to all of you for coming along here, and thank you very much to you at home for watching. If you can't stay up late till past the BBC One 10 o'clock news, remember that we are live on iPlayer at 8 o'clock every week. But from Question Time in Lisburn, from all of us here, bye-bye.
The BBC's Chris Mason, Lise Doucette and Jeremy Bowen discuss Rishi Sunak's visit to Israel next on BBC One in Newscast.